We made this.
Welcome to Pick a Disc, the podcast where someone picks a disc to talk about for whatever reason they want to. I am your host, Matt Latham, and as always, there's a guest here, and not as always, they're not picking the disc. No, it's a multiple of 10, which means it's a Matt pick, so it's me picking the disc again. So for the 11th one of these, I'm going to be picking I Want to Grow Up by Colleen Green from 2015. And the guest host that I've got is Sam Stokes from the Den of 10 podcast, who you may remember from the Cigaros episode from a few bit ago, the end of last year. Yeah, as always, we talk about the album, songs, blah, 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 and, you know, how we found the artist, etc., etc. You should know the thing by now. If you're listening to this for the first time, hi, you're going to be finding out what the whole thing is. Yeah, that's a great way of hosting, Matt. Yeah, anyway, before I do that, just remember you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. If you search for Pick a Disc, then it's usually me. Actually, I think it's probably all me. I don't know, unless someone else has taken the Pick a Disc name. I should try and look at that, shouldn't I? But yeah, anyway, yeah. And also, don't forget, there's a link to the Discord server in the show notes. So click on them and say hello if you really want to. So yeah, I can't think of anything else to say, but let's talk to Sam.
Hello and welcome to Pick a Disc. My name is not Matt Latham. My name is Sam Stokes. And I am here to guest host this episode of Pick a Disc because it is a Matt pick. Speaking of the man himself, welcome to your own podcast, Matt. How's it going?
It's great. I've always wanted to be on this podcast. It's nice to finally be on here.
You're lucky to get on, mate. You're lucky to get on. It's high demand.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's a waiting list, I think, apparently. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me, Sam. Thank you for allowing me the pleasure to turn up on my own podcast.
The least I can do. So, yes, I'm happy to be here as well. Back my second time on, first as guest host, and I'm excited to talk about an album that you introduced me to. But we'll get to that. Why don't you first introduce said album?
Yes, Sam. I am going to be talking about Colleen Green's 2015 album, I Want to Grow Up.
All right, and why have you picked this disc for your Matt pick today?
There's like a multitude of kind of like different reasons for it. One of the ones is it's part of my theory that I like to call the James A. Caster's wrong theory in terms of it's the full title is James Caster was 1 year out and theory in that. Or at least personally, I think 2015 was a very strong year for albums for me. I think I've only talked about, I think one Matt pick and the guest has picked another from that year that I really love as well, from that year. So I've not really had a chance to really talk about those years, that year in albums. And one of the key reasons as well, and perhaps the main reason, is that originally I was trying to find someone to talk about this for episode 30. Way back in like January of 2020. And that was mainly because it kind of linked in with the theme of the album in that when this came out, I was about a few months heading up to being 30, so I was 29. And Colleen Green wrote this the year before when she turned 30, and the whole album is kind of a almost like reflection or introspective kind of almost post-quarter life crisis shit. I'm now entering my fourth decade, kind of like musing, and I've always kind of connected with that element to it. And there's a lot of kind of questioning and like self-debating about growing up that kind of hit when I kind of hit and kind of like had raised similar questions when I was at that age as well. And yeah, so it kind of clicks with me on that. So yeah, and that's why I wanted to pick it, because it kind of felt like an album that helped me get to a kind of milestone in age, more or less.
Yeah, I think that's a really clear reason to get attached to an album, isn't it? Like finding it at the right time, whether it's because it's specifically like singing. The artist is specifically singing about the experience you're going through or the age you're currently at, or for another reason, like, it's the album you needed because it was the right vibe you needed. I think those albums attach themselves to us.
Yeah, and I think it kind of hit the right time. It's like the right word. Yeah.
Yes. So how did you discover Colleen Green?
So I had a quick look back at the last.fm stats for this, and I'll go back and one of the to add context to this, on my last.fm from at least March 2014, this is my 5th most listened to album of all time on last.fm, and it was all the previous well, the 4 albums above this, one has been a Matt pick, and the other 3 have been kind of like best ofs at the end of the year. So this is like up there. But yeah, so when I was looking back on Last FM around Mayish, and the reason I kind of started listening to it is that I'd been aware of a festival in kind of Derbyshire called Indie Tracks, which was in Ripley, and it's sadly no longer with us. And I've always kind of wanted to go because it's kind of like the indie pop kind of music that I was really into. And that year, I think one of my favourite bands was headlining, called The Pains of Being Pure at Heart. And I was like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to buy a ticket just for the first day and see what it's like. And it's when it case then, okay, I've now paid, 50 quid for this ticket. Let's get my money's worth. Who else is on the bill? And, and I was just going through, figuring out, listening to playlists of who's playing, and I can't remember what song it was that stuck out first, but it was a song by Colleen Green, and it was like, ooh, I quite like this. And I think it was just more or less just after the album came out, so I just started listening to the album on Spotify, and then just couldn't stop listening to it for about a few months leading up to the festival. And that's pretty much how I discovered the release, just because she was on a festival lineup and I was doing my homework.
Yeah, there are many ways to get into bands, but I think that's a really nice one, actually, because you get, like, if it's like a support act of a band you're going to see in a couple of months, or if it's a festival lineup, like, you really can get the most out of that event, can't you, by like doing your research, basically, getting in. And it just so happens that some of those are going to be some future favourites. That's cool.
Yeah, and that was definitely one of them. That Indie Tracks Festival I ended up going every year. So I went 2016, 17, 18 and 19, like for the next 5 years. And then you had to stop because of COVID, and unfortunately didn't survive.
Oh,
so it was
tragic.
It became my yearly kind of thing. I just went on my own. I went on my own for 2 days. I was able to drive there and back. It was about an hour's drive to the train station, and it kind of solidified my kind of annual pilgrimage to the festival that had my music taste, more or less. So.
All right. And so looking back over Colleen Green's career, this was looking back from 2023 as we are now. This was released in the middle of her career. So I'm just curious if this was the first album you went to, the first album you listened to of her.
Yeah, it definitely was. It was like, I think it was pretty much this for ages, and I didn't go back, didn't really listen to much of the early stuff until a bit later on. Yeah, it was just pretty much all about this album.
Would you say it was one of those situations where the album itself as a whole was like really struck you to the point where like that was enough for like a long time? Because I've had that with bands as well, where like I can say I absolutely love this album, but I just haven't got round to getting into the rest of their catalogue. Like, how long did it take you to get into the rest of her catalogue?
Well, again, Last of Them's helped me out a lot here. So basically she had I think And but I'll briefly mention these a bit later on. But she had like Milo Goes to Compton, which was like the first one, and then a kind of another album before then, after them, called Sock It To Me, which was like all home stuff. In 2015, I'd listened to I Want to Grow Up 490 Scrobbles, so of that album, and then 75 of Sock It To Me. So I think it was a long time before I listened to the first album. I think. Oh, actually, no. I actually listened to it the same month, but considering I listened to I Want to Grow Up apparently about 20 odd times, and Sock It To Me once in May 2015. I think my attention was pretty much on this one. But I did, but yeah, but I have got, but I do seem to have listened to Sock It To Me a lot more. So I did kind of drift back to it. But I think I kind of liked the more live band sound from this one. I think more than the home kind of recordings of the earlier stuff. So yeah.
All right. Well, I'm sure you'll tell me a little bit more about that. The details of your listening experience with her and stuff like that. Let's give a bit of general info about Colleen Green and this album. So, she's from the United States, from Los Angeles, and is an indie pop artist. So, a solo artist as well. Although she's recorded a lot of these albums, maybe not the first couple, but certainly this album with a live band in the studio. And she's currently signed to Hardly Art Records. I Want to Grow Up is her third album of 5, and it was released on the 24th of February 2015 through the label she's currently on, Hardly Art. As I mentioned, it's the first album professionally recorded in the studio, and the first album featuring a variety of musicians there with her in the studio, including some artists from other bands, including the entertainingly named Diarrhea Planet. Are you aware of Diarrhea Planet, Matt?
No, I'm not actually.
Yes, so a drummer from Diarrhea Planet, which I was tickled to see. And a guitarist from a band called Jeff the Brotherhood. So before I let you go into depth about your own love and experience of this album, a bit of context about why I'm hosting this episode. So I'm the host of the Den of 10 podcast on the We Made This network, and Matt was actually our first guest on the podcast. Mm-hmm. You came on to talk about the best albums of the 2010s, and we agreed that we'd share the stuff in advance so we could like listen to the stuff we'd never heard before and have a better discussion around it. And this was one of the albums.
Anyone who's listened to the last couple of episodes will know when I talked to Kiara about Adele's 21, it was the same episode. You brought that one on as well, so this is the same episode from that. And by the time recording, Sam, you probably wouldn't have known that I've just recorded an episode on 21 by Adele. So that episode gets brought up. That episode gets brought up there. So.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So it's like, we're all these interweaving plans are on purpose. Who can say if they are or not? But yeah, it was. I Want to Grow Up was the album. I mean, I liked all of the stuff you kind of put in that list and therefore indirectly recommended to me. And I realized that we've got pretty similar music tastes, especially in like the crossover of this kind of music. I feel like I used a few phrases when you came on Den of 10, like dream pop, Cali rock, which is something I like to use for bands like Best Coast, and we've communicated like shared kind of recommendations and stuff since. Yeah. But yeah, I Want to Grow Up was the one that I thought I like them all, but I like this the most. I really liked a lot of the tracks off it, and I've listened to it loads and loads since. Like it's like a couple of tracks are on just random Spotify playlists I've got and stuff. Yeah, I just love the vibe of this album and a lot of music like it. So I was excited to hear this was the one you were talking about. And keen to host.
Yeah, because I wasn't aware of how much you listened to any of the stuff that was recommended afterwards. from that. But oh no, that's nice to know. So at least I had an impact on that. But and at least it proves your credentials for hosting this one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So
As I mentioned, I put it in that kind of, indie pop, a bit of pop punk, maybe, dream pop, sometimes even touching on shoegaze, and that's
yeah,
this term I like to call Cali rock. So it kind of flitters between a few of those things from my perspective, and that's kind of part of what draws it to me. So let's now turn to you, Matt. What about this album, generally speaking, at first, appeals to you so much to put it among the elite in your reckoning?
it's not. So with my kind of like top tier and lower tier favorite albums, this doesn't make the top tier. Just it's high. It's high kind of middle tier. It's like in the playoff. It's like playoffs in the championship area of my kind of music taste. So I wouldn't class it as a top tier album. I still think it's a very high, just underneath. I think it was just. I think there are probably there's just a few albums that, given the choice at gunpoint, I'd choose to listen to over this one. But then there are billions of albums I would easily listen to this over. With this, I think as well. I think for going for the immediate rather than the more in-depth stuff you kind of pick up to after several listens. The sound of it, I really quite like the sound. I quite like the kind of low gaze, like shoegazy kind of pop element to it. It doesn't. I'm fond of shoegaze, but shoegaze sometimes it can be too long. It can probably go on for a bit too long, I'm not a fan of when the vocals are really drowned out by the music at times. So I kind of like how this kind of has that kind of shoegaze, but still maintains a more pop melodic pop sound to it. It has that kind of almost it has that California kind of indie shoegazy type sound that I kind of liken towards Best Coast or actually a band that I kind of really finally got into about a year or so earlier was Vivian Girls, which I don't know if you're aware of.
Yeah.
Vivian Girls, yeah. One of their actually a couple of their members pop up in the story with Colleen Green. One a bit later on, but one just before I listened to this album, Katie Freeman, who goes under the name Lacera, released an album in 2014, which I got obsessed with, called Fear of the Dark, and there's a very kind of crossover in terms of sound to this. So I think that album kind of primed me for this, I think, but has a lot more kind of almost scrappy, punky, indie, poppy sound to it, which I think Lacera's album was lacking. So it kind of ticked a lot more boxes of kind of my music taste on that just to hook me in and to get me to listen again. So I think that was like the initial hook for me, and that was the sound of it.
I see, and you said that kind of what Lacera album primed you. So was this a bit of a step into a new area of music, a bit of a new genre for you with this album?
I don't know. I'll try and think. I think that kind of almost almost right girl-esque grunginess, I think, kind of was dragged in by kind of Wolf Alice about a year before, when they released, I think, the Creature Songs EP. So I was starting getting into that kind of alternative rock with pop elements beforehand. So I don't think it was that much of a left turn. I think it was me kind of narrowing in on or discovering that there are elements of different genres I like that people have mashed together. So I think this is kind of this was like a kind of stepping stone to think, oh yeah, I quite like this, and it then kind of led me to kind of listen to more kind of stuff, or even helped me kind of listen to a few of Kate Nash's later third album, which was Very Right Girl, which I didn't really click with at first, and now I really quite like. So it kind of helped me acclimatise myself to stuff I might have listened to in the past but wasn't clicking with at first. So it was like bridging a gap, more or less, rather than being a left field.
Right, and then so did that kind of lead to getting into similar artists subsequently?
Yeah. So I was like I'm having a quick look at the fans also like stuff like Daddy Issues and Death Valley Girls, the Courtneys,
Yeah.
jump out in there. I think Vivian Girls and Lycera is actually the first first artist on there as well. I think Takao Cat and Bleached. I remember looking at. I don't think I've seen those live, but Peach Kelly Pop as well. Those are kind of acts that I remember listening to about a year or so after this, and I think the Spotify algorithm kind of think, oh, he's listening to this one a lot. So, but yeah, this kind of led me to more of that West Coast kind of grungy, shoegazy sound.
Yeah, I bet there's a great scene. Like if you live over there on the West Coast in like Northern California or like Washington State or something, Oregon, like I bet there's just such a great scene. You got like the grunge is still probably living it up in Seattle, and then you've got all this kind of, you'd expect this kind of stuff in California places, wouldn't you? It must be a really good scene to be involved in.
Yeah, and as well, and then if you, and then like the extra day of the week, you can probably jump in and get to like a pop punk show.
Yeah.
Blink 182, someone who's like influenced by Blink 182 and just go to one of their shows and stuff. Yeah.
West Coast hip hop. I mean, you would be spoiled for choice over there, wouldn't you? Really?
Yeah. The whole West Coast music scene is, I think it's got like its own kind of. Californian is like an adjective when describing music at times, and it's quite all-encompassing, or West Coast at least, that can cover from NWA all the way to the Beach Boys to Blink-182. Yeah, so I think I've been to LA once, but I never saw a gig there. So I'd love to actually.
I wonder if there's ever been like, you know how we had like on the South Coast in the UK, mods versus rockers. I wonder if you ever had like grungies versus like indie rock kind of battles.
Yeah, I don't know. If anyone knows who's listening, please let them know.
I bet there was early to mid 90s, with like the grunge explosion. I bet there was like people got into grunge and they were like, can't listen to any of that indie crap anymore.
Yeah, it's like the what was the term at school? Grebos and goss, I think.
Grebos. I haven't heard that word in about 20 years. I think
that's last time I said that I was probably 16.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
If you often had your hood up and like My Chemical Romance, you were a Grebo.
Yeah, walking down and you hear people going Grebo.
Yeah. Grebos versus Chavs.
Yes.
Anyway, a nice social tangent there. Okay, so we've heard how you became aware of Colleen Green and this album, and the kind of genre in general. I just want to touch quickly on the album in the context of the discography. I mean, perhaps without going into too much detail now. I mean, have you subsequently got into a whole discography more equally, more balanced, or is it still like this album stands out for you?
Again, if I I could lie, but the Last.fm figures do not lie. It's very, very skewed to this. I think it's very skewed to this. I'm like 5 scrabbles shy of 800 listens to songs of this album, whereas like Socky to Me is like 111, which is next. So it's not been balanced across the discography, so to speak. I think Cool, that came out in 2001, I remember liking, but it got buried, I think, by stuff that I was listening to a lot more, and I've always kind of meant to listen back to that. I've not listened to that as much as this one, so it's been very heavily, more or less, one album.
It's funny how that happens. It's happened with me with a number of artists as well. It's like albums that are very dear to me.
But then again, though, I have listened to her kind of lo-fi recreation of Dude Ranch. She did a whole cover album of Blink-182's Dude Ranch and turned it into like a almost shoegazy drone album, and it's
I've got to listen to that.
I don't think it's not on Spotify, I don't think, but it's on Bandcamp. But it's interesting, and it's great.
I mean, it's like I don't know as much about her as you do, but she seems interesting. Like, I mean, like, you know, there even on this album there are interesting choices, which I you know, and it kind of maybe on the first listen it maybe does sound quite similar. Like, you know, the genre between songs isn't going wildly one way and then another way.
Yeah.
But I think maybe second, third, fourth listen, you discover more variety than maybe you first thought. And I think she does make interesting choices.
Yeah, and I think particularly it's interesting that she's got songs about different subjects, yet it feels very cohesive as well. So it doesn't deviate too much in sound, but there's like a unique kind of theme tying in things together with this, like I mentioned, like the aforementioned kind of introspection, and like this is what a 29/30-year-old's thinking of, kind of building in, yet somehow manages to kind of tweak and twist familiar sounds, yet you can tell different songs by listening, even though that if you listen to it as a whole, it doesn't sound like it's varied throughout.
Yeah, you're right. I think it's true for both the musically and then also lyrically. For both of those, there is a distinct overarching theme, but within that variety that makes it interesting on multiple listens, and probably gives it some of them that kind of duality is probably what gives this album a standout factor, right? A bit of magic.
Yeah.
Among other things.
Yeah, and so you've got like it'll play with minor and major keys in like certain deliberate ways. And we'll get to the specific in a bit later on about that, but it sometimes it'll have like repeated it has a song that would any song other songs on other albums on the podcast, any like a song that's 6.5 minutes long will have to keep my attention very well. And this, there's a song here that's 6.5 minutes and it easily passes the Latham limit, and because it doesn't feel like it's 6.5 minutes, yet it doesn't feel like it deviates much in terms of lyrically, but then throws in some interesting like just spins like for about 8 bars, then goes back to what it was and stuff. And it's I just find it quite interesting how like something that, but then albums that don't differ in sound that much haven't really bothered me haven't bothered me, particularly if you're listening to something, if you're like me that will listen to something as a whole, or like try and listen to something like I do this album. It's very rare that I'll listen to random tracks. It's like a front to back one album, so the kind of cohesive sound through it kind of makes sense and like just helps tie its main themes together.
Yes. Well, I think we've kind of naturally come to a time where it's time to start talking about the individual songs. So we got 10 songs on this album. The LP is divided in half, of course, 5 and 5. And yeah, so Matt, without further ado, like, which song would you like to speak about first?
I know people in the past usually jump for their favourites first, but I'm going to keep my favourite last. Right. Yeah. Any future guests listening, that's how you try and wrangle more songs out of me in the discussion. But I think the first one that I think I remember listening to is one that I really like, is TV. As someone who has ran several blogs about TV over the years and has had at least 3 failed podcasts about TV before doing this one, and is also a host of a TV podcast and a co-host of another TV show podcast. Yeah, I think TV was also kind of like my first love before I found my niche with music. So I kind of got into music quite late in comparison to others. So it was like my early 20s when I kind of like, oh crap, I found my scene. But throughout then, TV has always been there, and this feels like it's the love letter to TV that kind of disillusioned people who just sit there watching TV need.
Yeah, And we were just talking about it, like the fact that there's the overarching theme, but then there's variety within it. And I think this song is a perfect example of that, because in one way it is just, like you say, a love letter to TV, and the lyrics are pretty clear about that. But at the same time, it fits in with that overall theme. It's part of that overarching theme she's trying to get across, like her love for TV, and at the time she spends watching TV, and what it means to her, what role it takes in her life, is part of the themes that are going through this album.
Yeah, and again, it kind of, what seems like kind of like a jokey song kind of goes into something that happens quite a bit actually, in that it kind of says, yeah, but also there's a kind of almost serious kind of like psychological or introspective aspect to the love of TV through it. And like in the bridge, it's like, the chorus is, it keeps me company when nobody else is around and I'm all by myself, and it's easier than being with somebody else in my room. And like, I think I can remember, like, particularly like very early 20s, late teens, where I didn't really much have a social life, and it was just me discovering torrents and just watching a load of TV. Like back when you was able to watch a lot of the major network dramas through the week and not really feel like you're missing much. And it kind of brings back to that aspect of feeling like you kind of grow attachments to characters or to TV, and like you become emotionally connected to the characters that you see on telly. And what's the word? It's parasocial relationships with like TV characters and stuff. And I think that song kind of particularly in like the later verses, starts to kind of hint towards that, in terms of like bringing a solace to the narrator, or to Colleen Green, or to myself or the people listening, to relating, saying, yeah, sometimes if you're feeling a bit shitty or you're feeling a bit naff, you throw on an episode of Parks and Recreation, and you realize, and you're like, these group of people are like helping you kind of like, oh yeah, there is like good people, or there is an optimistic view that you can take on stuff. And I think that kind of view, I think, is encapsulated very well with this song.
Absolutely. And just one more thing I'll mention personally about this song, which I think, because it's a prime example of a theme throughout the album, and her music in general, which is the way she sings. I find it quite, her vocal melodies and rhythms are a little bit unique. Like you can tell when very quickly, if you've just got like a random Spotify playlist of this kind of music, you can tell very quickly when it's a Colleen Green song. And there are telltale musical aspects to that. I've noticed with the way she sings, it's kind of like a car that kind of speeds up and then slows down, and then speeds up and slows down. Mm-hmm. But it never sounds jarring. She's really clever with the way she does it. And I think this song is a prime example, just from the very start. You know, it's like, TV is my friend, like really fast, and then stop. And it has been with me every day, like that. And but I don't know, she just does it really well. And that's I noticed that was part, you know, since I've been listening to this with a bit more of a analytical eye, I noticed that and how it works really well. Do you like the way she sings?
Yeah, there's kind of like I don't want to say slacker pop, but there's like a kind of Weezerish like element to it. I don't know. I think slacker pop doesn't sound. I think I've seen stoner pop drifted around, because I think Twitter username is like Colleen Green 4020. So I think marijuana is very much a very strong aspect to, I think, a kind of a brand, more or less, or a stage identity, as well as the sunglasses. Because I think if no one's ever seen, like, a lot of the time she just performs indoors wearing sunglasses.
Yes.
So that's like a part of a kind of a visual brand as well.
I'm not sure I've ever seen a picture of her without sunglasses. Like the bassist from Wolfpack.
Yeah.
always in shades.
Yeah. That's what, that. And I think I've kind of forgotten what the question was. But,
just about the way she sings. So like, if you like the way she sings, her voice, and I think vocal melodies.
Yeah, and I think she does. Yeah, and because it does match with just kind of I think like I think it kind of works. Like I think if you saw Colleen Green and perhaps the album cover, perhaps the album cover or the album covers, I think she sounds very similar to. She sounds what you might expect if you've not listened to her before. I think, and that synergy works really well in her favour.
All right, brilliant. Good choice for the first one to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
What's next?
I think if we get serious and go for the Latham Limit Breaker, Deeper Than Love, with track 5, which is I think is it 6:35.
No, just over 6 if I remember. Correctly.
6 minutes. 6 minutes and 5 seconds. So yeah, so this is one of the ones that breaks the Latham limit, and I can list this one. But yeah, this one I think again, it's one of those songs that I think it feels monotonous. It goes on and on, but it has a lot of. It's very lyrically dense, and I like very lyrically dense songs. It's one of the reasons one of my favourite bands is Los Camasinos. They're very lyrically dense, and the verses are quite long and kind of storytelling and deeps in, and is again very introspective, almost in some aspects quite relatable in terms of anxieties or insecurities based on romance or interactions with people or relationships and that kind of stuff. And I think it's it's not bombastic. It doesn't kind of hit you. It just kind of lets you sit back and kind of absorb the song and what it's saying. Particularly after, I think, when you've got, just after you finish Pay Attention, which is the song before, where it's slightly more upbeat. It's slightly more upbeat in its music thing. This one kind of brings you down and wants you to think about what you're singing about, and I think it does it really well.
It does it incredibly well. I mean, the first time I actually like stopped and listened to these lyrics, it really does touch on the things you're feeling at that
Mm-hmm.
kind of age, you know. And I'm 34 now, and I was, you got me into this, only like a year ago or something, if that. And she's a bit younger when she's kind of what she's talking about, but yeah, I'm still there,
Mm-hmm.
pretty much. And so I'm still listening to things I'm going through. And yeah, some of the lyrics really hit me. But the one where she says, "The possibility worries me the most, not harm or abuse or becoming a ghost. It's the closeness, the intimacy. I'm afraid it might kill me." I mean, that, I'm happily married now, right? But there was a time when this would have smacked me in the face, these lyrics. Yeah, I mean, what do you think, Jamie, about the you said it's lyrically dense, but thematically, what do you think about the lyrics in this song?
I think they're really good. I think good. I think they're really good. They feel like Colleen Green's opening up, opening up, kind of like, or working through things as she's singing stuff. And there's at least something here that I'll be very surprised if there's nothing in here that, or at least two lines that don't resonate with someone, because there's always there's a lot of insecurity to it. Like for example, I think there's in the first verse, and there's a ring of questions on my mind, like will I find a love that lasts as long as my life, or will I die before ever becoming a wife? And I'm wondering whether if I'm even the marrying kind. Hey, can I give you my life and I know you're just going to die? Which is quite dark, but still kind of interesting. Like, I'm 37 and single, and that question's already been answered there. Like, will I find a love that lasts as long as my life? I can remember thinking of that when I was like 20, and now I'm 37. I'm like, yeah, that the answer's going to be no, for me at least. But I can remember having that question asking that question, or something very similar, and then even now, like the questioning, like, I mean, I say you're happily married now. I'm not, but the question of whether I am the marrying kind or something, that's a question I've asked myself many years of stuff, and that kind of still hits as like an insecurity and stuff of like, as I'm getting older, that question's constantly on my head and stuff. And I think even though it was written about someone turning 30 and leaving the 20s, that's like a line I think can resonate no matter what age you are. I think depending on your personal circumstance.
Oh yeah, I think that's a lot more universal than probably a lot of people would like to admit, to be honest. One of those things, that's a bit unspoken, but for the honest, it's there. And there's a lot of insecurity. It really feels like she opened the floodgates in a certain sense, and a lot of truth came out pouring into this song. So it's full of insecurities. And I read a bit of an interview where she was talking about this song, and there was insecurities around the creation of it as well. She was really scared about the lyrics that she'd penned to it. She was scared about sharing it with the musicians she was recording the album with. She was insecure about that. She, about like she one of the quotes was like, "Oh my parents are going to listen to this. Is this something I want them to hear?" And in the end, she got some really positive feedback from the musicians recording on the album, and that gave her the comfort and the confidence to get this on the album.
Yeah, I think a lot of some of this as well, and I think with other like tracks as well, is that there's an element of self-deprecation, and perhaps take self-deprecation to mask kind of humour and stuff, and like there's the line, "Because I'm shitty and I'm lame and I'm dumb and I'm a bore, and once you get to know me you won't love me anymore," which is probably one of the most self-deprecating lines on the album. But I think how I relate to that as well is that anyone who's followed me on Twitter, self-deprecation is pretty much my on-stage persona for the podcast. A lot of it is probably just so that I know that not many people are not gonna listen or review things, new things, but I kind of relate to that so well, which is kind of like almost like a defense mechanism. So if you automatically say, "Oh yeah, I'm this, and this," then when it somehow is revealed to be true, it won't impact as much. And that kind of like self-deprecation is something that I sometimes wish I didn't relate to as much. But so that kind of almost ties in with as I said, the on-stage persona of me and the constant kind of like self-deprecating personality that I have behind those tweets and stuff. So yeah, even, and I'm saying that even though I know it's at least there's an element of kind of serious, kind of self-critical, again, introspection through it, which again I can often relate to, because I think I'm pretty sure I've said something those lines to myself many times in the past, when I was much younger and a bit less secure in myself. So
yeah. Introspection's the word, and it's an introspective album, and this is smack bang in the middle, and I think that's where the introspection. I mean, this and possibly the couple of tracks coming after this, with constituting the middle of the album, really is the peak introspection, isn't it, on the album?
Yeah. Well, So I was going to move on to these of track 6 and 7 next.
Right.
So that's a nice segue, Sam. It's like you hosted the podcast before. So yeah.
I should start my own. Yeah.
Yeah. You might need to vet your guests better, I think. Self-deprecation again.
There we go.
Yeah.
Proving his own brand.
Yeah. But yeah, if we can move on to things that are bad for me, part 1 and part 2, because they are the centerpiece of the album and the thematic peak of it.
Yes, so you got the two-parter at the beginning of side B on the LP, as you just mentioned. So the thematic center, as you just said. Why do you love these songs so much? Why do you want to speak about them together? Because not all albums that have like part 1 and part 2 of songs are necessarily like that intimately related or work together in a cool way, that work together well. So why does this work well, and why do you like this as the centerpiece of the album?
So I think again, there's an ultimate relatability to the sentiment behind both, where which links to new beginnings or new starts or fresh starts or reaching milestones, New Year's resolutions or anything in that, like where you get to a certain point and like, okay, I need to perhaps do this, I need to do this, I need to do this. So yeah, okay, I need to look back, I need to do a kind of self-assessment or a stock check on what I'm doing or what things I'm doing or who I'm hanging out with, who I'm involved with, blah 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 blah. Basically, stop doing things that are bad for you. Or whilst I probably can't, I don't relate to some of the more kind of like chemical stuff she's alluding to in this, but the main kind of like sense and theme or the idea behind the song is kind of relatable in that like okay, yeah, I need to stop eating biscuits, and 7 years later that's a habit I still haven't broken yet. Yeah, I need to stop doing this, I need to kind of cut things out, I need to stop doing things, I need to perhaps do other stuff and all these things. And the first half of that song, part one of this has that kind of like major key upbeat, I've got to stop doing things that are bad for me, kind of like almost rallying cry. It's the closest the album has to a kind of upbeat pop hit, like a bombastic pop hit, like almost I think it's a vocal distortion effect away from being reached by S Club 7, more or less. Yeah, and like, so for example, the chorus is like saying, I just maybe change my body's destiny and start listening to my own advice, and maybe my life could be just as twice as nice. And goes on to like having a kind of like self-awareness. I've been acting with a total disregard of my own well-being. Well, that's my problem. I need to do this. I need to take responsibility. Stop doing things. Get better. It's the only way I get better. I only get better. And then the song kind of winds down, gets slower. The key shifts into minor key, and we get part two. And part two, I think, is kind of like the nice gut punch where realism kicks in, and kind of like there's a kind of realization that, okay, yeah, basic human needs or basic habits aren't easily broken. And again, self-awareness kicks in, and it's the subconscious that kicks in. So if the conscious mind is the first song, the subconscious mind is the second, saying, but you're not going to be able to quit this easy. You're not going to do this because you're not confident enough to do things. You're not able to you don't have the capability yet to be able to break through this kind of mental barrier that you set yourself. And then that kind of anxiety kicks in, and like, crap, maybe I can't do those things that I've just been singing about that I want to do. Maybe I'll just not give up and stuff. And again, kind of relatability where that, like, the amount of times I've like, I need to get back in my running, and then something kicks, like I have a slight knock or an injury or something, and then I'm not running for a couple of weeks, and it's kind of like, and you kind of struggle to find the energy to kick back in. This is alluding to perhaps slightly more stronger voice stuff, but that, again, that kind of level of like relatability of that side of you, which is questioning whether you're capable of doing those things that you really want to do, and whether you can do them. It's like the battle between the conscious and subconscious mind, and the way that the music twitches on that second song is just great to kind of encapsulate that feeling of that anxiety kicking in. And I just think it helps cement what the album's about and kind of recontextualizes what you've listened to so far. And I think the album becomes even better after these two songs.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think this is the golden moment of the album, that transition from part one to part two. It really is the golden moment. And musically, the way it, as you said, it goes into, I think, less than half tempo, and then like for a major to minor switch. And what's really clever about it is the guitar is just playing a power chord, I think. That kind of fuzz effect that's present throughout almost the entire album, which is brilliant. I love a fuzz guitar in this kind of music, but it's basically just playing a power chord. But her minor vocal melody is a fantastic transition. Such a contrast from part 1 to part 2. And then in combination with the things she's saying, it's almost like a double whammy, a double punch in your ears. And as someone who has to deal with anxiety as a bit of a kind of obstacle in life at times, it resonates with me so much, because you can get into such a bit of positive momentum in your brain about, oh yeah, I'm doing well at this, I'm going to do even better, and I'm going to start doing that as well, and then in a couple of months' time I'll be in this place, and then before you know it, without even realizing, without some kind of specific trigger or event, just subtly from nowhere, you just find yourself like just completely on the floor in terms of energy and motivation and positivity, and the anxiety kicks in and makes you feel bad for like you didn't go to the gym, you didn't do this, and it's just it's only 2 or 3, 4 minutes of music, not the 2 songs together. I'm talking about this like transition moment between the 2 songs. Mm-hmm. It's not a long time musically, and yet it conveys so much. I think that's what's so good about it.
I think the start of part 2 works as well, because you've got the I want to get better, it's the only way to get better at the end of it, and he goes, and then the transition starts to kick in, and like it is seamless. It's like it's like seamless, particularly if you listen to it on the actual vinyl record, like because the track doesn't even jump or have that like momentary skip. It goes slow, and the first thing she says, I want to do drugs right now, which is completely in contrast to what she was just singing about, and then delves into like that thing. And I think one of the kind of more relatable pieces of lyrics I've ever kind of clicked with is the chorus for this, is where because there's an energy inside my brain set to self-deprecate, some kind of anxiety which makes me do things that I know are bad for me. And I think that's like one of the best. It's one of my favourite choruses in a song, I think. One of the more relatable ones. And it's just, I just think, it just looks really, really good.
It's interesting how at the end of part 2, the music picks up again,
mm-hmm.
but the lyrics kind of stay in the more negative anxiety side of things.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like, here's the angel, here's the devil, and then to finish, here's them smashed together to show the reality of what's going on in someone's brain. Like, it isn't actually angel and devil. Like, it's just one brain, and it's dealing with a lot, all at the same time.
There's the TV show Angel, the spin-off of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I can't remember if you're a fan of Buffy and Angel.
I'm a big Buffy fan. I never got into Angel the same way, but yeah.
There's a whole section about one of the characters embracing the dark side, and there's a discussion which, on reflection's a bit kind of like on the nose in terms of metaphor, but it's always stuck with me in that, like, if you got white paint and black paint, as soon as you put black paint into white paint, you get grey, and no matter how often you put white paint back into that, you're always going to get grey. And like, it's in the moment it works, but then I think when you kind of liken it to things like this, it's not. It sounds cheesy, but it's true though. Like, I think you can, whenever something gets messed in, no matter how much you try to get over that, you're going to have that thing always there, or at least some trace of it always going to be there. You're never going to be pure white again. You're just going to have a bit of grey, which is annoying if you want a bright white kitchen and you've accidentally put black paint into your white paint. But yeah, that kind of like analogy I think works well, and this song is like a great encapsulation of that feeling.
Very good. Anything else you'd like to, as you say, is as the thematic centerpiece? Is there anything else you'd like to add, or should we go to another song? Pushing on chronologically through the album, just in case you weren't necessarily going to speak about this song. The next track on the album is "Some People," and on the kind of more deep and analytical listens, preparing to host this episode for you, I think I decided Some People was maybe my favorite.
Okay.
As an isolated song, I mean, because for all the reasons we discussed, kind of Things That Are Bad For Me part 1 and 2, you know, that in the context of the album, as I said, is probably like a peak moment. But isolated songs, thinking about like instrumentation and melodies and rhythms and stuff, I think I love Some People perhaps the most. It's got that epitome of that Cali rock sound, great beat, and a nice kind of shoegazy moment as well in it, and a nice guitar solo near the end. And I absolutely love when she repeats that lyric, "Who thinks like you? Who thinks like you?" and changes it ever so slightly, like it climbs and climbs and climbs. So, musically, I think it encapsulates what I like about her sound. So perhaps, you know, it could be different tomorrow, but perhaps that's my favorite track on the album, Some People. So I just wanted to know quickly what you think of that track.
Again, I say there's not a song on here I dislike at all. So this song, really like this song. And again, I never really thought about it in the musical bit. I think it's more the lyrical kind of thing that hits. I think on the time recording, it was on the last Sunday that I spoke about Adele's 21, and this feels like a slightly more relatable Someone Like You. or the sequel to that anyway.
Never would have made that connection between those two songs.
But then again, the thing about it though, like, do you want to go as interchangeable? Why is it easy for some people? Because, and you've already found a new girl, a cute girl to keep you company. Such a huge world. I guess any girl is as good as me. And I think, as Kiara said on the Adele episode, it's like it's losing the breakup. It's like losing the breakup, as you said about that song. And I think this is the losing the breakup song on this album. Because there's definitely, so it's kind of like, because it feels like a reaction to the ex moving on, and but then not being really over them. So like, how did you do it? Why is it easy for some people to suddenly move on or to jump into things while not for other people? Or like, just why is it easy for some people in general things? And I think it just has that again in like relatability to it throughout, and I think particularly on a re-listen, when you kind of get what the song's about, and like the kind of story that's happening in the head and stuff, it kind of, as much as like the rest of the album, it kind of rewards repeated listens.
Yeah, you're right, actually. Yeah, I mean, obviously, you have listened to the album a lot more. You know it better than me, so I should have taken your word for it. And yeah, you are right. And you could even replace when she says, "Who thinks like you?" to "Someone like you."
Yeah.
And then, I'd like to. That's a collab I'd like to see, actually. Adele and Colleen Green. What would come out of that? That'd be awesome. That would be
interesting.
Like pop punky Adele or something like that.
Yeah, that would be very interesting.
I'm here for that.
Yeah, that would be very interesting.
Come on, if you're listening up there. Right. I do remember you saying you wanted to save the best till last. So are we at that point?
Yeah, so my favourite song on the album, and I think is a song that I think I end up shoving on my kind of favourite songs ever lists, and that's the album closer, Whatever I Want. I think it's the encapsulation of kind of what's been said over the last 35 minutes, the previous 9 songs. It works in the kind of like, it feels like there's a character arc closing, and it feels like Colleen Green has had some kind of character change, or has been impacted over the course of the album, and has some kind of acceptance. So she's gone through kind of like there's some people and things that are bad for me, and has been kind of changed by those songs or impacted by them, and has come out from this, and it's a more realistic and healthier way of looking at positivity than perhaps Things That Are Bad for Me part 1. So it feels more accepting in that, or it's more of an upbeat end. So it's like it's like the end of a film where like the main character kind of walks out and the sun's come out and the rain stopped, and they just walk off, take a deep breath, walk off, and then the credits roll up. It's got that kind of credit sound. So like Colleen Green's walking off, credits are rolling, and the song plays over the credits. It has that feel to it, and I really like just it sounds simple, but I just like the meaning behind it, the kind of upbeat stuff, the upbeat sound for it. It's I must have mentioned this in the podcast. There's a certain point where I kind of was really down on myself, particularly in my mid-20s, and there was a point where I kind of like questioned about like, what do people like me? Why don't people like me? Blah blah. And the question I asked myself was, do I like myself? And then when I asked myself that question, I kind of led onto a path where I kind of wanted, okay, I need to kind of set my default mode to optimism, which, considering that I've just said that a lot of my kind of humour is based on self-deprecation, it feels like a very massive contradiction in terms, but there's a kind of more proactive viewpoints that I kind of took. I was listening to a Killer song actually that kind of set that off, but this song kind of reminds me of that mindset that I kind of managed to get myself into, where it's like, okay, I need to kind of recontextualize how I think about things, rather than just saying I'm going to do this, stop doing things that are bad for me. I need to recontextualize how I view things, be a bit more optimistic, or see the world in a slightly better way, or just instead of be glass half full rather than half empty type person. And this song kind of, whilst not explicitly about that, I get that vibe from this song, and I think it's a nice upbeat way, and a kind of healthier, it's more healthy mentally, I think, this song, than perhaps previous ones, and it's a nice way to end the album. So if you've been a bit down throughout and been relating to that, this is the bit saying, yeah, but then because of all that stuff that you just heard me sing about, this song is me saying that, no, I can do what I want, and there are times where I feel down, but if I can put my mind to it and set myself realistic goals, I can move on and feel like I can do what I want and perhaps be slightly better for it.
Yeah, I completely agree that that makes it a very fitting way to end the album.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just thinking as you were saying that, like, just remembering that the context of this is that transition, like from turning 30, basically, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, we all remember being a teenager and how everything seems like it was either the best thing ever or the worst thing ever, just drama in your head, going from one extreme to the other. And I think in your 20s, you're still coming off that a bit, and like there's high highs and low lows for a lot of people. I know me, in the 20s, and perhaps she's touching on something where this transition for a lot of people into the 30s is a time where a lot of us we probably never lose the fluctuating highs and lows. I don't think we ever lose that, but perhaps we get a handle on it and accept it and start to think, I can't control the highs and lows completely. And like you said, perhaps I'm just going to try to see things in a more general perspective, as glass half full, and accept the fluctuations in life. Accept that some days I'll wake up and I'm things that are bad for me, part one. Other days I'll wake up and I'm things that are bad for me, part two.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But I'm going to be pretty calm and pretty okay through most of it on a daily basis.
Yeah, and there are parts of this that are like, I think it's the second verse where it goes, there are times when I didn't know if I could do it, didn't know if I could do it alone, but then my eyes opened up and now I see no limit. The world I live in is a design of my own. This is linking back to, I think, A Grand Don't Come For Free, all the way in episode 20, From the Streets, where I think Empty Cans was the last song on that album. The idea being that there's a certain point, I think, and I feel like I've mentioned this before on the podcast, and if you listened to me say this before, I apologise, but I'm going to say it again. I think one of the last one of the last things I think you kind of learn or kind of grow awareness of, or hopefully should grow awareness of, to kind of gain some sense of maturity or being an adult or emotional maturity, is the moment you realise that other people are going through their own complex things as well, which is something again that was like a very key thing in that Streets track. That verse I've just said is kind of like the world I live in is a design of my own, in terms of what your the complex things that you're feeling, or the three-dimensional viewpoint that you have. Everyone else has perhaps got different versions of that, and I think, and there's a certain point I think once like people see that, and I see that, and I think that changes your own kind of perception of yourself. I think in that place, in that, okay, yeah, because like no one gives a shit about you because they are pretty much thinking about themselves the way that you're thinking about yourself right now. And I think that took me far too long. I think far too long to realise. I think than I think other people did, and I think that kind of feeling again, I feel like it's linked to in this song as I'm discussing it now. So
it's interesting you're doing an Adele album fairly close to this, because she always takes snapshots in her life, and I know there's often a heavy romantic focus, but there's also just often a general life kind of a look on life, and it's interesting when you get into these lyrics on really good albums, and if that point in your life is behind you, then you get nostalgic or you reflect. If it's where you are now, then it can hit you like a ton of bricks.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's future, then it might be something further down the line for you. And it's interesting what mental doors listening to a CD can open.
Mm-hmm. That's it. Yeah, no, really agree.
A fitting end to the album, as we both agree, and a fitting end to discussing the individual songs off it,
mm-hmm.
which takes us into just a quick look at the critical reception. So, I mean, I think it's fair to say that this isn't an album that took, mainstream charts by storm.
There's been an episode in between this and the Adele one. I think if you compare the critical and the commercial performance of this to Adele, there's a big difference.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not even. It's again using a football analogy. We're not even in the same league here.
Yeah, I think I said this to Kiara on the Adele 21. I remember saying that there are single tracks on 21 which pretty much has more listens on Spotify than perhaps the combination of the 10 albums I picked for your podcast.
Yeah, it's because there's like. Some of them are knocking on 1 billion listens, I think. That's just stupendous, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But yes, in the league of her own, Colleen Green got very positive reviews for this album. So going through some big names, Enemy gave it 7 out of 10, Pitchfork 7.4 out of 10. Rolling Stone only 3 stars, which sounds a tad harsh because it's a great album. Spin gave this 8 out of 10. That was the highest rating I could find, and it was a good read actually. That review, that perhaps they got it in inverted commas a bit more than others. 3.5 stars on AllMusic. So I think that shows that people who self-proclaim to know about music and to be looking in all the interesting corners of the music landscape appreciated this album, and a common comment was how it was a step up, so to speak. This was a refining of her sound and a sign of progress and achievement for her musically. So yeah, that's the summary of the critical reception. You got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, because as we've been talking about it, I think there's been like kind of like as we talked about the depths and stuff and what we've seen and found in this album. At the start of this, I kind of said it wasn't a top tier. It's very high, middle tier, but not a top tier album. And I think I kind of, as we was talking, I kind of brought up the Streets album again because at the end of that episode, it was that discussion that I had with Colin, the guest back then, where the discussion kind of made me consider whether upgrading Grand Don't Come For Free to a top tier album, to which it did. And I think as this episode's been going on, I was starting to wonder whether I actually should be thinking of upgrading this to a top tier album as well. Because I'm like, actually, you know what? I think I actually really do like this album to the point where it might get promoted to the Premiership. So
the power's in your hands, man.
Yeah. I'm gonna muse on that. I don't know. I'm not gonna give a. I'm gonna perhaps give it another listen and just wonder, saying, is it a top tier album? And I might. I'm gonna have to muse on that. It's probably not as instant as the Streets, but I know. I was just, as we've been talking about it, and with the critical reception, I'm like, you know what? There are parts of this that I really, really like, and I didn't realise that I'd connected with it until as on a deeper level as we had until this discussion. So yeah, so this could end up being either the 19th or 20th album to get to the.
You know, I don't know your parameters for that
Yeah.
classification, but I suspect it might be quite difficult because this album seems to me, I don't have that same classification, but obviously in my head I'm always like qualifying and quantifying and rating and reviewing albums in my head, and there's something about this album that like makes it almost a textbook, like just on the cusp, like just reaching. I don't know. It's hard to describe. I don't know if it's because the genre of music it is one where it's limited feels like such a negative word. We've already discussed how it does have a nice variety in there, but perhaps compared to others, there's something holding it back. I don't know. It's hard to describe.
Yeah, but I don't know. That usually doesn't bother me as much, but I'm gonna have to think deeply. And follow me on Twitter.
Allowed.
Yeah, follow me on Twitter at Pickadis just to to see the update on that. But yeah, I'm gonna
to be announced.
Yeah, but it's this discussion's made me feel things about this album that I never know I had. Further things about this album that I never knew I had. So that's my response to the critical reaction to that. So,
all right. Well, we said very early on in the episode that you got into Colleen Green as a result of an upcoming opportunity to see her live. So let's come full circle.
Yeah.
And let me ask you, how was she at that festival? And have you seen her more times after that?
So she performed at. She was on tour on the UK during July of 2015. So she was playing She played in tracks in Derbyshire. So it was like on a decent set. So she played for about a good 45-50 minutes on the outdoor stage, and really good. I really liked her. I thought she was really good. To the point where it turns out that the following day she was playing Birmingham. So she played indie tracks on the Saturday where I went to, and then she played Birmingham on the Sunday. So I went to that. So I saw her 2 days on the trot.
Wow!
There's not many artists that I could say I've done that to. I think it's usually either friends of mine or artists that friends have put on shows, and they've either played Wolverhampton one day and Birmingham the next. I really can't think of many other times I've seen that. I think, well, I'm just looking at the spreadsheet, and it is bands that friends have done.
While you look over it, off the top of my head, the only band I've done that to is Biffy Clyro, way back, probably around the kind of 2008 kind of time.
Yeah, I think I've seen her for a third time, which was back in 2006, and that's the last time I saw her, where she played the Hare and Hounds in Birmingham. But that was a joint headline tour with Cassie Ramone from the Vivian Girls, and the Vivian Girls was also, one of the other members was Katie Freeman, who was Lacera. So, like coming back full circle. And that one, I think it was but there wasn't many people in that one, which was a bit of a shame. But I think, well, I do remember on the Cassie Ramone set, everyone was sat on the floor, and everyone was sat on the floor, and so she was just, and Cassie Ramone was on the floor as well, just singing guitars with an electric plugged in behind her, and just singing from that. So,
Stoned,
yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah, but I really like them. But I really like them. I think it's just her and a guitar, and I think an iPad with a backing track with all the different like layers and stuff. So it's just usually her. I've not seen her with a full band. I think she has played with a full band in the past, and I think she has been in the UK since, but she's not been near me at a time that I've been able to get to see her. So, but yeah, the times I've seen her, I've kind of liked. Yeah, she's been great, and I kind of want to see her again at some point. So, Colleen Green, if you're listening, please come back to the UK, preferably Birmingham.
Yeah, I mean, next time she's in the Midlands, I'll happily go to that gig with you.
Yeah.
Happily. Yeah, let me know. You'll probably have a bit of a closer eye on it than me, perhaps.
Yeah,
so let me know.
Definitely will do. Yeah.
All right. So I think my final question then is just regarding the rest of her work and her discography. And I'm a good person to ask this question because I have really enjoyed this album and got into it. And besides the odd track that Spotify throws at me, I haven't listened to anything else by her. So where do I go next, Matt?
I think Cool is probably next. I think as much as I'm a fan of Colin Green, I've been a bad fan and not listened to Cool as much. And that I think it's just been, because I think it was just lost in me getting caught up in listening to other things. But yeah, if anything, I this has just made me like, is guilting me into listening to Cool more. So I recommend going to Cool. Socky To Me is interesting because it's all like programmed drums rather than a live band. So it's interesting, and it's quite interesting to see what she's kind of like before the kind of polished studio sound. So yeah, Cool next, and then perhaps Socky To Me. Yeah, so yeah, that. Oh, and definitely listen to the Dude Ranch. Why is it? But it's only on her Bandcamp, I think. Blink-182's Dude Ranch is played by Colleen Green. Yeah, so it is pretty much, it is Dude Ranch all the way through. So
that sounds good. I'm going to wait for like a sunny spring day, because it sounds like a good thing to listen to, as is a lot of her music when the sun's shining, I think.
Yeah, but it kind of turns into a fuzzy drone-ish version. So so you got like Pathetic and Damn It, which is and then you get to Josie, which is just like kind of almost interesting. Yeah, I'm gonna use this opportunity as well. Previous Matt Pick host and this picker, Dan O'Dell, who picked who asked me about Blink-182's Untitled album, and he chose our friend Ben's album, Constant Fiction, our friend B-Sides, Constant Fiction's album. He did a cover album of Enema of the State, but that was like acoustic. Well, he turned it into acoustic emo. So yeah, so that's, if anyone's a fan of Blink-182 wants to hear two cover albums, go and listen to both of them.
I was going to say that's niche, but there are plenty of Blink-182 fans out there, so yeah, maybe they will. Well, I think I will then reluctantly hand the reins of your own podcast back to you, Matt.
No, yeah, Sam, you've done a brilliant job. Yeah, can't feel kind of guilty taking the reins back, but then no, I'm not. Give it me a there you go. Push you off the horse. I'm back in power.
This podcast needs a much more self-deprecating host than me. Yeah. Back to you.
Oh dear. I think I can't wait to hear that. Bring Sam back. Sam for host. There we go. Yeah, there I go. I'm back in the self-deprecating zone. Yeah, so I'm back in control, and again, because as we're at the very end of the conversation, I'd say very in the conversation. But before that, it's the very important question, and I'm giving control back because I can't have control over this, which is the song for the playlist. Now, Sam, now everyone who's not, if anyone's not listened to this before, what this is, I'm going to ask Sam to pick one song off this album to be immortalised forever for the Spotify Hall of Fame playlist. I can't veto it. Whatever Sam says goes. He can't. I don't want it to be swayed by me at all. So, Sam, which song off this album are you going to put on the playlist?
Well, I'm really torn now because I think things that are bad for me is a two-parter, and I think something tells me your playlist system spreadsheet, whatever you got, it will explode if a two-parter is tried to shove in there.
Well,
and but that makes me think I'll go for part 2. But then does part 2 work in isolation? So there's a precedent set in a previous episode. So
when Bill Van Weigel was here, we covered Live Bullet, and there were Travelling Man and Beautiful Loser were separate tracks, but the way they performed were very much similar. So they kind of transitioned into each other, and he kind of made the case to have both in there because there was like 2 songs, but they were part of one section of the concert. So it's not much. So if you're gonna fight for having those 2, I'm not gonna stop you. I technically can't stop you. I mean, because there is a case for 2 of them.
That being a live thing possibly makes it a separate, have its own rationale, I think. So perhaps I'm gonna go for a less controversial option and say Deeper Than Love.
Okay.
Just to annoy the Latham limits mainly.
Deeper Than Love, which again, that song doesn't break the Latham limit. I've actually got I've got a playlist on Spotify which has called Surpassing the Latham Limit, which has 13 songs. There's
13.
There's 13 songs. It's an hour and 40 minutes long.
Brilliant.
It's an hour and 40 minutes long playlist with 13 songs in it of songs I like. So
it sounds like probably stuff me and Colleen listen to.
Yeah. Deeper Than Love is actually on that playlist. It was added on February 13th, 2022.
Yes, well, I think that's we talked about it, and we both appreciated its musical depth and emotional depth, and I think it's a good shout.
Mm-hmm. I do. Yeah, so Deeper Than Love becomes the latest edition of the latest song to go on to the podcast, following the song picked on an episode that hasn't been recorded yet because it's going to be recorded on next Monday. Because it's episode 109, this is episode 110, and Someone Like You by Adele, and then before then, This Must Be the Place, Naive Melody by the Talking Heads. So,
oh, what a song!
So yeah, so that's a nice run of songs, including the one that I don't know yet. So, yeah, and we are at the end of our chat, Sam. Sam, it's been absolutely brilliant having you be me for an hour and a half.
Thanks for letting me into your shoes. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, I'm glad. I'm surprised you could fit into my trainers. But yeah, if people want to find you and listen to Den of Geek and perhaps even the episode, which the episode that
Den of 10, not Den of Geek.
Oh, fuck's sake!
Good website, but I can't claim any involvement.
Oh, God damn it! It's okay. It's been a while since I've misquoted something. It's when I called Dead and Buried Red and Buried like a minute in to this podcast when I speak to Frankie. Other We Made This podcast.
Yeah.
So no, that's staying in.
Take 2.
I'm not editing that out.
Yeah.
I'm embracing my self-deprecating nature. Oh, my mistakes. If people want to find you and the Den of 10, including the episode, including the now often referenced episode that I'm on, where can they find the Den of 10?
Right, yes. So as I mentioned before, Den of 10 is, along with Pick a Disc, on the We Made This network. So WeMadeThisNetwork.com would be one place to go to for it, or any of your podcast providers, Spotify, Apple Music, whatever you use. We release an episode every Wednesday in which we'll talk, run down top 10 lists of things like films, TV, music, of course, as Matt did with us one time. Video games, which was the most recent episode just out as we talk, and some other random things as well. So, we're on all those providers, and you can also follow, like, share, and all that on Twitter and Instagram at Den of 10 Pod.
Yeah, do like Den of 10. I think it's really good. I didn't realize how interested I found myself listening to the footballer, the top 10 footballers one as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, cause I'm only kind of I'm a kind of international tournaments only football person. I can't handle club football. Like, I won't be able to handle club football. Just getting really tense over England playing is bad enough, but I can't do that on a weekly basis.
Yeah, that is something. Series 2, we're trying to tie episodes into what's going on. So a World Cup episode around the World Cup, survival horror episode around the release of The Last of Us TV show. So, yes, so keep an eye on us, and it might help you get swept up and engaged in the stuff that's going on, just like we are. Yeah,
of course. Yeah, and again, both on the We Made This Podcast Network. So give that a follow as well. And so we are now at the very end of our chat, and 110 episodes in. God, I feel old. I feel old.
But you want to grow old.
Yes, but I do want to grow old. I want to grow up. Sam, thank you ever so much for coming on.
My pleasure.
You've been listening to Pick a Disc, and I've been your host, Matthew Latham. Our theme music is Pump by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com. Pick a Disc is hosted by the We Made This Podcast Network, and you can find them on www.spreaker.com/user/WeMadeThis. You can find the Pick a Disc show site on www.spreaker.com/show/pickadisc. You can find us on all the usual social media type places like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter under Pick a Disc. You can also email us on pickadisc@gmail.com. Until next time, happy listening to all those discs that you are picking. Goodbye.
Do you like pop culture and top 10 lists? If you do, then step inside the Den of 10. In the Den, we have countless top 10 lists to captivate and titillate even the weariest soul. We've got lists of films.
And there's that famous thing about the scene where he improvised his way through smashing his hand and cutting his hand open on the glass as he banged his hand on the table.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't really say boo to that.
Music.
The rest of the song is like just a swirling crescendo of clever songwriting, amazing singing, great drumming, like beautiful guitar effects.
Video games.
And I think that's exactly what happened with Zelda. It was everything, looking back, is on a much lower resolution to what we see in Breath of the Wild. But as I was playing it, I just felt like my imagination was just going absolutely wild.
TV. This is where a sitcom verges on the cinematic, still in a neat 20 minutes. And the interaction between these vastly different characters is so well realised. And more. Listen to us on all major podcast providers. Find us on Twitter at Den of 10 Pod, where you can like, follow, comment and vote, or find us on the We Made This Podcast Network at WeMadeThisNetwork.com. We hope to see you soon in the Den of 10.